Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we are completing the first 15 books of Confucius Analects. This is a little unusual format for us. We are going to be sharing the verses or the chapters of the Analects that spoke most to us. And this will be sort of that chance to have that robust conversation that we've all been itching at almost every week, but have had trouble, making time for as we've moved our way through the Analects. We can share the translation that Jason and I have worked on, and I will do that with my selections. But otherwise, pick whatever translation you prefer, whichever verse you prefer. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hopefully have my windows all work. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see. Can everyone see my screen all right? Yes, no, maybe so?
Yes.
Ah, good. Evening, Mark. Welcome. So, a couple of verses that I picked out because they really resonated with me were 5, 4, 5, 10. 5 and 6 really seem to just resonate with me a lot. I'll start with 5, 4. This is the verse. Zagong asked, "What do you say of Su, me?" The master said, "You are a vessel." Zagong said, "What kind of vessel?" The master said, "A vessel of gemmed ancestral sacrifice." I love this chapter. I find it amusing because Zagong takes this as high compliment, high praise. But we saw, like you see in the notes at the bottom, just a couple of books before, in book 2, verse 12, Confucius was very unequivocal about saying a junsa is not a vessel. To be a vessel is to be not a good thing. It's a hollow receptacle that doesn't have any use of self. It only is useful for what it holds. And I like that metaphor because first and foremost, and above everything else, Confucius was a teacher. He is speaking with students. He is trying to educate them in his way, his ideals of wisdom, ren, and the like. And here he has a student who's angling for praise. And instead of getting obvious praise, what he gets instead is this sort of veiled praise that, is it a compliment? Is it an insult? It's the ambiguity of this that I really do appreciate. I'll start with that one. If you have any comments or any thoughts about that verse, or whether he's insulting or complimenting his student, please put up a hand, throw up a question mark or an exclamation point in chat. I have to stay unmuted. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks for getting us started off with such an entertaining double entendre, perhaps. But what it really makes me think of is the great importance that all of his students play in the Analects. In a way as a foil, but also in the sense that we can't understand Confucius in isolation, only within the context of a community, in a way, an empire or a principality, or whatever we want to call it. That's what I was thinking.
I'm reevaluating, but I think the theme of community or society, it pervades the Analects. It's probably, second to learning, the most reiterated theme of the text. Quan.
Okay, thanks, Armand, for having chosen that excellent paragraph because it stressed in a absolutely extraordinary manner the contrast between being and doing. Because for those who did not participate to our former reunions, Zhu Kong was a very distinguished man. He was 30 years younger than Confucius, and he was wealthy. He was a diplomat, and he spoke many languages. So he was, according to the ordinary criteria for assessing a man, an outstanding man. However, for Confucius, he was a precious vessel because a vessel for the ancestral sacrifices or the ancestral worship is not any vessel, it's a special vessel. So it was a compliment to the fact that he was an outstanding man according to the ordinary criteria, but that he still has a long way to go in terms of developing his being. And I stop here.
We've got one for compliment, and I think Quan makes a very compelling case. Anyone else, please feel free to add your thoughts. I will say that as a professor, I've found new appreciation for Confucius because this is the compilation of class notes. This is what his students took from him to me to be the most important things that they taught him, that he taught them. And then it was edited and compiled and recompiled over years and years and years so that it had structure. Some of those got clustered together so that they worked at a theme. It is one of the most curated texts in human history, but I love the fact that it doesn't give up answers. It demands that the reader or the student work for the answers because that was the way that Confucius viewed himself as a teacher. Students had to work for it. Jason, go ahead.
Since Quan talk about it's a compliment, okay, so I try to reveal a different view because in book 2, chapter 12, okay, Confucius said, a Junzi, which is a moral model, a moral agent, is not a vessel. Okay, so here is reflect what further explained. Okay, Zigong is in Confucius' view. Probably you can say insult, or probably in a positive way you can say Confucius hope, okay, or expect him to make him more progress. Don't stick with a important vessel because Junzi, in Confucius' point of view, should be more all-rounded, capability, not just be used as a tool. So I'm not saying I agree with like Junzi should not be the tool, but I just say I believe that's a Confucius means, and that's another way to view it. Yeah. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your take because I agree. It is not explicit. The fact that it is a precious vessel means that it serves a very particular and very precious function, but it is a singular function. That is what something ceremonial would be. Whereas something more versatile or utilitarian is what I think he expected of his students, is to be junsa. They needed to be equipped for more than just a function. First Quan and then Michael. Quan, go ahead.
Okay, so I would say that once again, it's for the lower trigram, it's a compliment. For the upper trigram, it's a nice advice expressed kindly that it was not expressed in word, but it was expressed in, let's say, what is behind the word, doing and being. On the term of doing, as I said, Zikong was truly outstanding. In terms of being, he was not zero, but let's say that there was a margin for improvement. I stop here.
Michael, go ahead. Oh, Michael, we can't hear you.
Be able to now. I'm sorry.
There, we can hear you now.
I apologize. Apologize for that. Is that I think that I could agree that maybe Confucius wanted his student to reflect on something. But what that something is what I would like to know, because I think his teaching style is not a style that ever insults a student, either indirectly or directly. That it's a question type of guidance type of thing, encouraging self-reflection and improvement and, you know, that type of stuff. So that's just kind of where I'm at. So I could be wrong about that, but it's just an impression that it's very much like, you know, the Socratic method in a lot of ways, his teaching. And Socrates wasn't, you know, I can't remember him insulting students. And I could see that it might be a cause for self-reflection, but that's what I'm trying to figure out, is what he wanted his student to reflect on in saying that to him.
Interesting question, and I obviously can't give you an empirical answer. We can only speculate what the lesson was for Zigong. It does make a great segue to the next chapter that I was going to share, but does anybody else have any parting shots on this one before we move on to that one?
Well, I was wondering if it would shed any light on Michael's question, if we could figure out what the function of these ancestral vessels were.
Juan, you want to field that?
Yeah, well, it can be anything. It can, if you can have a bronze vessel for being used as a wine container, as being a container for cereals, a container for meat, can be, and let's say a beautiful container for worshiping the ancestors. Okay, so it means that you would be put in a nice environment, that you fulfill a very honorable task or honorable role. So it's definitely not something bad, or it's definitely not an insult. But as Jason stressed, and as Aman stressed, and I stressed too, it's truly the image between doing, okay, because the vessel has a specific utility, and in this case, it's very honorable, but it was a veiled message, and it's not so veiled at that for an Asian, that kind of speech. It was an advice expressed kindly to Zikong. Let's not forget that Zikong was a grown-up man of 30-something when he spoke to Confucius. Okay, Confucius was born in 551 BCE, and Zikong was born in 521 BCE. So there was a 30 years of difference between them. But when they met each other, Zikong was at least 25, between 25 and 30s. So Confucius was speaking to a grown-up man. Okay, so he knew perfectly that Zikong would understand what he meant, that you are truly outstanding in doing and in performing, and you're not bad in your being, but there is a margin for improvement.
Jason.
Yeah, let me stick with the text, okay, because the interpretation, insulting or praise is very difficult to figure out. So Confucius used the when Zigong asked what kind of vessel, Confucius' answer is 胡脸. So he's specific what kind of vessel. That's a vessel to put in with a lot of gem. Okay, so that means beautiful, expensive vessel. Okay, definitely very expensive, very important. So it also reflects Zhigong's capability, because Zhigong is one of the excellent students. He is good in language and probably one of the most shining disciple. So I'm not going to say he is insulting him, encourage him, or praise him. I don't know. But the words he used is 胡莲, which means very beautiful, very expensive, very important vessel.
Mark.
One other thought I had was that in some ways, since we've made the point so many times over that Confucius was not trying to reinvent the wheel, he was trying to draw attention and to reinvigorate in some ways the ancient classics. And in that way, he was also a vessel, an ancestral vessel, so to speak. So while it's true, I see what you're saying, that 212 says the gentleman is no vessel, the jinsa. Is that consistent with Confucius imagining himself to not be a jinsu?
I find that interesting because what you just said makes me think that, excuse me, the fact that he would choose something like an ancestral vessel could be an allusion to himself, could be an allusion to what they are receptacles for. It may be that you are not a vessel, or a junsa is not a vessel, is a throwaway term, whereas in this context, same image, different connotation possible. Jason, go ahead.
Okay, so vessel is a translation. Okay, so but the qi, that's the Chinese word. Okay, so it means vessel, that's true, but also means tools. So another way to talk about is 君子 is not a means but their end. Okay, so that's another way to understand this way, because qi, this word in Chinese, also means instrument or means a means. So that's a double meaning.
Quan?
Sorry, I did not unmute. Okay, I absolutely agree with Jason that the gentleman is not a tool, and that is absolutely clear in my mind. But I think that the fact that Confucius chose the tool as being a precious bronze vessel is not, how can I say it, has been selected precisely because the Confucius stressed that he see Zhigong as a capable man, capable to be sent to foreign powers, to be an ambassador, for example. Because let's not forget that in ancient China at the time, a bronze vessel is an object of prestige, okay? It's an object of status. So if you compare someone to a bronze vessel used for ancestral worship, it is certainly not an offense to that person, but at the same time, it is absolutely clear too that the metaphorical allusion to the fact that the gentleman is not a tool is perfectly clear in my mind too. I stop here.
Paul?
Yeah, that quote about "is a gentleman is not a vessel" brings me to the concept of pursuing the metaphor. As you say, nothing's simple here, because could it be referring to really, you can have a vessel-like aspect to you, but the important essence of you is what is in the vessel. In other words, Confucius as a vessel is infused with the ancestral teachings, but you have to have a vessel to hold them. But Confucius is not the vessel. They're not incompatible. And he could be saying to the student, you have this beautiful container and you're slowly filling it. I'm just sort of pursuing that metaphor in my mind. So that's my thought.
I think we could probably strain this for a little bit. I do want to take the opportunity and advantage to share the next verse that I picked, because it will address something that Michael brought up about, is the master ever insulting to his students? Excuse me. Book 5, verse 10. Zai Yu slept during the daytime. I love this one. Or decorated, painted his bedroom. The master said, the rotten wood cannot be carved. The dirty wall cannot be painted. Why bother scolding you? The master said, it used to be this way. I listened to what people said and believed them to act accordingly. Now I listen to what people say and watch how they act. Because of you, I have changed. A student nodding off in class caused the master to change his worldview on what can we expect from people. Is it what they tell you, or is it what they do? He comes down on the side of it's going to be what they do, because people lie, not just to you, but to themselves. They say, oh yeah, I want to be in the school, I want to study hard, and then they'll sleep during the day, which was a much, much greater cardinal sin to the master's mind in ancient China. Remember, no indoor lighting, no Zoom, no, even candles would be expensive. Daylight was a precious commodity. You used it as the time and opportunity to be able to read or to write. And when the sun went down, you use those precious commodities very, very sparingly, if at all. And so Zayu, or Zaiwo, or excuse me, Zayu, sleeping during the day was committing an act of betrayal against learning, which in his mind, there was no greater betrayal that a person could do. Learning was paramount to being in any way capable of achieving the quality of being a junsa, but just for improving yourself. I won't name names, and I won't point anybody out, because all these students are here and they're awake and their cameras are on, so good on them. But they've sat next to people, I'm sure, who have been sawing logs in the classroom time. And we all have. We've all had that experience. Lord knows I went to enough classes in zombie mode. But I didn't have a teacher who used my shortcoming as their reason for upending their faith in people's forthrightness and honesty. Here we have the master, if not directly insulting his student, at least chastising him in an oblique way about how it affects him. So yeah, he could be very Socratic, but he could be very prickly and very much a taskmaster and very demanding and not too shy about coming down harshly on his students. At least that's the impressions I get from the Analects. All right. Anyone have a thought about this? Jason.
Yeah, most, I think 90% of the interpretation is Zai Wo or Zai sleep during the class. So teacher would like to use this example, on sleep in the class. But another explanation is, if you know Chinese, they say 奏, okay. If you see the word, it could be 画, that means pet, okay. So 寝 means sleep, also means bedroom. So it could be, okay, 宰我 is painting or cleaning his bedroom. That's why Confucius said, the rotten wood cannot carve, the dirty wood cannot paint. So Confucius, yes, Confucius is criticizing criticize Zai Wu because he is doing something useless, okay, not because sleeping. So that's another explanation. And then Zai Wu always a problematic student in Chinese standard because he always want to challenge his teacher. Okay, so I don't know you want to challenge your teacher or not, but Zai Wu is the student. He constantly challenged his teacher. When Confucius said mourning for 3 years, he says why 3 years? When Confucius talk about ren, which means benevolence, he said, or if the whale has ren, should I jump into the whale? So he is problematic to the traditional teacher point of view. He's a problematic student. But he definitely a very smart student. He questioned, he challenged his teacher. So I just provide a different explanation here. But still don't sleep in the classroom. That's the point.
I appreciate that, Jason. Daniel, your hand went up next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I just thought how the person was sleeping in class and they were like wasting time, but that was interesting. And then there's like 2 points I got from it. One was like we should be grateful at the things we have, like this tech right now. Like our lives are better now than in the past, so be grateful. And then uh, 1 sec, I forgot, I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
That's okay. If you
Okay.
don't mind,
You go into
just
you could go.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could go into the other person. I'll finish it after.
hold your thought. Raise your hand again if it comes back to you.
Okay, thank
But
you.
yes, I agree. It's kind of funny that it's a perennial problem. It's a problem 2,400 years ago, and it's a problem today. Guan.
Oh, I remembered it.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Or
Okay.
Daniel.
Daniel. Yeah, it was like it's kind of like a quote I heard, but it's like 3 months from now you will look back either with like pride or embarrassment. It's like the things we do now. Are we being productive? Are we bettering ourselves? What are we doing? So don't just waste. Don't like be grateful, and but also like use your time correctly.
Thank you. I might just steal that for class next quarter. Quan, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to propose another hypothesis. Okay, we know that among Confucius' disciples, you have Zulu, who was almost his age, since Zulu was about 9 to 10 years younger, who was his mate or his buddy among his disciples. And in the case of Zai Yu was 30 years younger than Confucius, but because of his attitude, I would say that Confucius see him as a little bit special too, in the sense that because of the difference in age, he would not see him as his buddy like with Lu, but I would see he would see him as the special student that would challenge him. Because let's not forget that in the Confucian tradition, among the 72 outstanding disciples, there was an inner circle that would be called the 12 philosophers. And Zai Yu was part of that 12 philosophers. Okay, so Zai Yu was not a reject, on the contrary, but rather the guy, precisely as Jason said, that would challenge him in a certain way. And I think that Confucius was not at all bothered by that kind of challenger, since it was not the regular, ordinary way to interact with your teacher in ancient China. I'm not sure that Confucius was quite entertained by Zai Yu to a certain extent, and must have liked him for that. And we can easily also say that after all, it's a kind of tough love, okay, in the sense that you would not chastise someone if that someone is not a promising person in your eyes. And I stop here.
Thank you, Quan. And I want to say from a personal note, students who challenge you are absolutely worth their weight in gold. They can actually spark the conversation, get the ball rolling. I think Confucius may have labored under a couple of different norms where it was a cultural expectation to not challenge your teacher. And so Zaiwo challenges were a thumb in the eye or a thumbing of the nose at the social mores of the time. But I think Confucius actually kind of liked that, because he too was thumbing his nose at those social mores in favor of what he referred to as the traditional values of the Zhou. So yeah, I think he was kind of a double-edged sword, but I think he gave as good as he got. And this is one example of him giving Zaiwa as good as he gets. Michael, go ahead.
So a little bit of a radical hypothesis is that, apparently the student's conduct, as far as I can tell, caused Confucius to reflect on something. So there's a sense in which the student is now teaching Confucius something. And maybe he's telling the student, you've taught me something. Just an idea.
I think there's something to that. And I do think that, again, like I said, a student that challenges you, it can be worth their weight in gold. Though I do think what Jason said before, whether we're accusing him of sleeping or painting his room, he was squandering time. And that is something that just was always a no-no in Confucius' mind. Nick.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. But before I do that, question. This verse, verse 10, has two parts. Are you just focusing on the first part? Is that idea without commenting the second part?
Oh, no. Why bother scolding? Which second part are you thinking of?
In the same verse, verse 10.
Where it says, it used to be this way, I listened to what people said
Right.
and believed. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Because
Yes.
I don't know why they are together, but they seems to be very different. But anyway, I just want to make a comment comparing the first part of verse 10 with the earlier verse you cited, the verse 4, I think. So, they read very differently, right? So verse 4 is very much complementary. It's like, it's more modern idea of encouraging students, right? Maybe even to the extent of saying something that might not be 100% accurate, but nevertheless. But this one, the verse 10, the first part of verse 10 is the other way around. This is really to shame the student. And so it's hard to get the message just comparing the two verses. However, the Chinese culture, after Confucius in thousands of years, took the second message to heart. And this, down to today, this is the culture of shame. And this has taken a prominence in the interaction between seniors and juniors, between parents and children, between teachers and pupils. So this is the sort of the dominant thought in the Chinese social setting. While the first idea, the verse 4, the more Rousseauian idea of encouraging, juniors' development, even by saying something that is over flowery, that kind of lost its way in the Chinese culture. Yeah.
And to echo what you're saying, Nick, it is not at all uncommon, and back me if I am, or correct me if I'm misspeaking. If you speak to someone in China or someone in a Confucian society who's raised with this and compliment their junior, oh, what wonderful kids you have there, you'll have some sort of reaction like, those kids are dumb, they're lazy, they're slow. And it's not met with jaw-dropping shock, like it would be here in the Western world if you were at the playground and the person next to you was like, my daughter's an idiot. You can't get her to do. You would absolutely just be like, what's the matter with you? But this is normative in Confucian cultures. It's very common. And because it's so common, it's not as malicey, not as, it doesn't sting as much as kind of taking like a yeah sort of. And Jason, I'll let you go next, but anyone who wants to tell me, no, you're making this up, you feel free. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, my answer specifically to Nick. Okay, so I think Nick make a good point. These two parts doesn't seem connect each other. So that's why I suggest, I think, instead of sleeping in the daytime, if you change to painting the bedroom or painting the wall, okay, that would make more sense. And you will see Confucius criticize is not so harsh. And there's another thing you will see, I think Michael talked about, student also remind Confucius something, right? So if you, instead of doing his sleep, think about his sleeping in the room, think about he is painting his bedroom, okay, as like ADHD kids, right? They try to fix something, they're restless. That's why Confucius common. So if you think this way, probably make more sense. And these two parts probably logically make sense.
I believe Mark had his hand up next, and then we'll go to you, Quan. So Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Amin. What this particular passage really reminds me of is Plato. And I know that in reading through the Analects this year, there have been many, many times that we've referred to Plato. I have 16 references just in the notes I took over the past year that we've mentioned Plato. And I know that I think it was Jason who made the point, or possibly Quan, that, or maybe it was you yourself, Emma, that Plato is a little bit more reliant on mathematics, whereas Confucius is very reliant on ritual. But and Quan also made the point a number of months ago that there is a universal philosophy of East and West that we can detect, but it looks different because of the different languages that we get in the different philosophers. But here, in this contrast of word and deed, we have something that parallels Plato's Laches, one of his shorter, possibly earlier dialogues, on page 188, Stephanus 188, where they're describing what it is to know a man. And Laches says, such a man is exactly what I understand by musical. He has tuned himself with the fairest harmony, not that of a harp or other entertaining instrument, but has made a true concord of his own life between his words and his deeds. Such a man makes me rejoice with his utterance, and anyone would judge me a lover of discussion. Now of Socrates' words, now this is Laches talking, by the way, now he's talking about Socrates. Now of Socrates' words, I have no experience, but formerly, I fancy, I have made trial of his deeds, and I have seen his deeds, and there I found him living up to the very fine words that are spoken about him.
Interesting. I'm reflecting on it because it strikes me that these Plato and Confucius kind of contemporaneous. I mean, you know, give or take a century. But also foundational to the thinking of entire hemispheres of the planet. And the parallels between them are really striking, so that it must be in just the very detail of difference that the trajectories sort of diverge so far over time. But what I was really struck by was his discussion of music there, because the importance of music is something that almost every thinker on the planet of that axial age, and I know the axial age is a controversial thing, really like tuned into, they honed in on music is a quintessential component. Confucius says something like music is the type of enjoyment that men can, that makes humans human, or men can enjoy. I'm paraphrasing badly because I don't have it at hand. Quan, maybe you do.
Not for now.
Doesn't he say that virtue is like the flowering of character, and music is the flowering of virtue, something like that?
Yeah. Well, maybe Mark, you remember that in the classical Greek education before Plato, you remember that you have logos and musique. And if you happen to have watched the teaching on YouTube of Professor Nikos Xantoulis, he explained in an excellent manner that distinction between logos and musique. And logos is precisely the teaching by words and by mathematics, and musique, on the contrary, is precisely what you just said. Okay, that you have to be embody, that you have to embody the principles that have been expressed by logos. And the three principles that have been offered to explain logos is that your person has to express, to embody, to incarnate rhythm, melody, and harmony. And that was a musical metaphor, but I think it was not only a metaphor, but it was truly the existential expression that the Greek word, the musique, expressed as the perfect embodiment of those timeless principles at the level of logos. I often say the upper trigram and the lower trigram. I would make the hypothesis that logos would be the upper trigram and musique would be the lower trigram, but expressing perfectly logos.
Thank you, Quan. Anyone else have any thoughts about sleeping in class? Or just in general? I find it kind of interesting though, Jason, on the one hand, you're inclined to make the first chapter a little harsher towards Zulu, but Zigong, excuse me, but you're wanting to temper down the harshness against Zaiwo. And so you're kind of looking for that mean between both of them, right?
No,
Nick.
no. I'm sorry. Okay, so
That's okay.
As a translator, okay, I have to limit myself on the word I see. It doesn't mean I agree or disagree on everybody's interpretation. When I do translation, I have to limit what I learned from my teacher before, or I learned from my culture. I have to limit myself to the text only. And the only thing I have to impose is logic. I have to make sure they logically make sense. Okay, so that's the only thing I do, and I try very hard not bring my own experience or my own opinion to the text.
I appreciate that about our project. Nick, go ahead.
I just want to make two comments. So one is in reaction to Mark's reference to Plato. It's interesting. that Confucius also emphasized the importance of music. And but in Confucius setup, music is tied to ceremony. It's a very important part of ceremony, and ceremony is a big part for Confucius, system. So it's in that sense that music is very important for the cultivation of virtue, whatever. And a few weeks ago, we read some passage where Confucius actually wanted to regulate the types of music, right? He said some kind of music, should be banned because they are bad for the soul, whatever. So this is very, very similar to the Platonic regulation in Republic of certain type of poem or music or plays in that sense. So that's an interesting concept for me. But the second point I want to make is actually on the second part of the verse 10. Yeah, this is after the sleeping in the class. Mm-hmm. So the second part is when you read it, it's, this is commonsensical, right? So Confucius was just reflecting on his own grow up, in interacting with other people, which are less than perfect. So okay. So this is very similar to the idea of trust but verify kind of saying. But what I want to say is that actually the population in China actually have taken that message slightly differently across geographical regions. So I'm stereotyping a bit, by saying this. So if you travel in the northern part of China, people tend to follow the first part of the maxim. They kind of listen to you and trust you to begin with. But if you go to the southern part, people tend to listen to you, but then they want to verify. So that has a subtle difference in the social behavior. And obviously, if you look at the outcome, southern part of China is more developed economically, which kind of verify that the value of the proposition that you ought to listen to people, but verify before you trust them in the interaction for whatever social purpose. So I just want to put that thought in there. The subtle difference how the current culture take that teaching.
Thank you, Nick. I didn't necessarily. We've talked a little bit more in the Tao Te Ching than we did in Confucius about the northern-southern divide of China, the cold north and the hot-blooded south. But it is interesting to see how even the Confucian values have their sort of geographical iterations. Quan, go ahead.
I just have a short comment about the fact that children are sometimes disparaged in China by their parents. I would like to say that it's a false modesty, okay? So it's a way to say that my child is not good, but it's not what the parents truly think, and the child knows that the parents is playing the false modest person. And the other thing I want to say too, that not only in China, but I think in Eastern Asian societies in general, the teachers, most of the time when he's interested by a student, will introduce a kind critique or a kind remark by first offering a compliment about something that he truly thinks that the student master or has, and he will go on with his critique, but most of the time kindly expressed. So it's not something that has been lost, according to me.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the backup. Yeah, it's true. It's shocking for many Westerners who first encounter it, but it is taken tongue in cheek, and it's not treated as some sort of emotional abuse. It is understood. This is cultural norm. This is, you're supposed to be humble. You're supposed to be deferring. Yeah, Michael.
Not knowing that much about Confucius, it just seems on the surface that Confucius and Plato differed in their approaches to censorship, what they would censor. And that's interesting to me. And also, you know, they may have differed on the moral influence of specific types of music and that type of stuff, and the role of music in shaping character and social order. Apparently, from what I'm hearing, is that Confucius saw music principally as shaping social order. Was I incorrect in hearing it that way?
I think you are onto something, and I think Madison Avenue knows it as well. I believe almost any one of us who still have childhood jingles rolling through our head because the advertisers found a pithy way to make, you know, us all know that they'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony and buy the world a Coke and keep it company. I have not seen that commercial in 38 years, and it's still in my head. And it's a little insidious, but I bring it up because music penetrates the deepest levels of learning. It penetrates the deepest levels of memory. We find people who are dementia sufferers of Alzheimer's, still able to sing or recite childhood music. If they learn to play an instrument and live playing it their whole life, those skills are some of the last to leave them. So music has a enduring effect in a way that other lessons do not. And so what you package with those musical lessons also endures within degrees. So we still all know our A, B, C, D, E, F, Gs, or how to sing happy birthday. And there are values that are transmitted with that. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on the music issue. Anyone else? Okay. Anybody else with a comment, or I will share another verse. I picked out a few for just the occasion, but if somebody else has a verse, please do not be shy to say, I read this one. It's really the one that I wanted to discuss.
I would like to share a verse if you want.
Absolutely, Quan.
Well, I think that you probably guess which one I want to offer. It's in book 2. So
I knew it. Ages,
so
right? The ages.
yes, absolutely. So I will just read it. Okay, it's not very long. It's book 2, paragraph 4, so 2.4. The master said, when I was 15, I set my heart on learning. At 30, I took my stand. At 40, I was without confusion. At 50, I knew the command of Tien, or of heaven. At 60, I heard that with a compliant ear. At 70, I follow the desires of my heart and do not overstep the bounds. So it's one of my favorite paragraphs because for me, Confucianism is about learning, okay? But learning has many dimensions. And here you notice that Confucius uses 6 stages with using symbolic ages, 15, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. So what kind of learning we can have? We can have learning in the basic meaning of learning in the sense that we read things that have been produced by others, or we explore things that have been created by others, like when we go to school. But learning is also activating our imagination, meaning active learning. Learning is also how to discover new stuff from what you have learned before. Learning is also how to create, how to invent, how to discover. So, and learning also means that you get information, but you also develop skills, and skills can be manual skills, intellectual skills, or social skills, of course, is part of learning. But Confucianism, first and foremost, when in Confucianism we speak of learning, is about being, okay? The famous Junzi, the gentleman. So, and that's why I was so happy when Amen chose the verse about the Zikong, which is a precious vessel, because that verse that has been introduced by Amon was speaking of the same thing, but in a shorter way, okay? In the sense that for those who are regular in the group knows that I make a rapprochement with the famous hexagram of the I Ching, okay? And I have the honor to repeat here for those who are here for the first time, that if you see the hexagram, which is the 3 lines at the bottom with a space and 3 lines at the top, for me, 15 years old, 30 years old, and 40 years old correspond to line 1, 2, 3 that the I Ching call the lower trigram, okay? And 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, and 70 years old correspond to lines 4, 5, 6 of the hexagram that I call the upper trigram, okay? Because in the hexagram, the first line is a number 1, and the 6th line is the top line. So it corresponds to the symbolic representation of what is learning precisely, okay? Because in that short paragraph 2.4, it's a summary of the epistemological journey, meaning the journey to learning. And I said, learning can be information, can be skills, but first and foremost, within Confucianism, and I think within any high philosophy, is about being. And I will take 2 more minutes to stress a difference between 2 Chinese characters. The first Chinese character, and I'm sorry for those who already know that because I mentioned that many times during our conversation and discussion, is about chu and chu. Okay, chu pronounced at the first tone and chu pronounced at the 4th tone. The chu pronounced at the first tone is made by 2 symbols. The symbols for arrow on the left and the symbol for mouth on the right. And it corresponds to the second line of the epistemological development or the intellect. The arrow represents your skill, your manual skills, and the mouth represents your intellectual skills or your verbal skills, okay? So that chu at the first tone is the intellect, the second stage of epistemological development according to the hexagram or part of the lower trigram of the time dimension. And this chu pronounced at the 4th tone is also combined by the arrow, the mouth, but with a sun under. Okay, so here the intellect is lighted or is enlightened, if you want, by the sun of wisdom. And there, that chu is at the 6th line of the epistemological development, part of the timeless reality. So a human being is a complex reality made of doing, of feeling, and of being. And that's why I think that this paragraph is extraordinary. And I stop here for now.
Thank you, Quan. And I'm glad you picked this one. This is a absolute, it's a hallmark of the Analects. I dare to say anyone who's studied them has probably encountered the stages. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you can have any kind of interpretation on this one. And then let me share my screen. And because I think the translation is important, I'm very, shall say, very different way of translate this one. Okay, just basics on the word I choose. Okay, so basics. If you I list here, right? So 15. Confucius talk about 15, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70. So 15, he begin to study. We believe he studied the ritual, Li. At 30, he used the word Li, means stand up. That means he entered the society at the 30. Okay. 40, okay, he has no doubt. Okay, so you think about it, usually we will say people in the 40, that's midlife crisis. You start to get confused. So Confucius say, I'm no doubt. Okay. 50, that's important. He said, I know the mandate or command of heaven. Okay, so that's his, you want to call it epistemology, or he knows his destination. That's another way to talk. Important thing is 60. 60 soon. They use a lot of translation you will see about the ear compliant, this one. And right now, a lot of scholars would believe this one, okay, is a redundant word. Okay, so it's okay, basics is no meaning. Okay, basically it means, logically you will make sense in this way. 50, you know, Confucius know the mandate of heaven. 60, he will follow the mandate of heaven. 70, he follow the desire of his heart. That means his heart is the same as the demand. So you will see the first three stage, 15, 30, and the 40, he is trying to establish himself without confuse. Okay, at the 40, no confusion at 40. And the 50, he started know something beyond himself. Okay. 70, he will follow the mandate. If you check his life, his career, 60, he probably the time he get out or being fired, okay, from the government work and then travel around, and then let's say 60 something, he coming back. He kind of feel like he want to retire or something. And he died at 73 or 72 years old. Okay, so I think that's confusion. And again, that's my my explanation based on the text I see. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I will say what I've been struck by this many, many times, but what I find striking now is that very first sort of progression from the age of 15 to the age of 30. At the age of 15, I had my mind bent on learning. At the age of 30, I stood firm. So as there's a quote from somebody that I often paraphrase or requote, which is, the worst part about aging is it's like a roll of toilet paper. It starts to go faster towards the end. And I've always held this in my mind because a year goes by for me like that now. Whereas I remember years taking an eternity when I was a kid. You know, I remember grade school and summer seemed indefinitely long. And now, you know, when I get a summer quarter between spring and fall, it just seems to zip by. But that's because it becomes a smaller percentage, a smaller portion of the life that I have lived. Between the age of 15 to 30, you are redoubling the amount of life you have lived. You're taking 15 years and including that whole lifetime once again onto it. And so metaphorically, the idea that at 15, I set my mind or bent my mind towards learning. And it wasn't until 30 that I was stood up, prepared to enter the world. Taken metaphorically, this is my entire lifetime so far is the amount of lifetime I needed to be prepared for the world in which I am stepping into. And I don't think that ends just in that first step. I think that could be extended as a metaphor throughout the text, but also throughout this passage, that indefinitely I will always have my mind bent on learning, and indefinitely it will take the entire life that I have to be adequately prepared for the world in which I will find myself in. That's what strikes me about this now. But yes, I thank you, Quan. This is a absolute classic. It is also used as the indicator of how long do I got to be at this Confucius stuff before I'm ready to call myself adequate. Confucius answered to that for himself, 70 years. 70 years before my internal desire and my external performance and harmony with the world and being Ren and following Li, all these things just coalesced and lined up. But it took 70 years. So in the meantime, polish and grind, polish and grind, polish and grind, because that's what you've got to do that whole way there before you can say, oh, or as I like to put it, I live for the day when someone says, Granddad doesn't know what he's talking about, because that's a blank check for me. Anybody else have thoughts about this? Everybody else is just sleeping in class. No, I'm kidding. Oh, Mark, go ahead.
I think it's amazing. I'm really learning a lot from what you are all talking about this and saying about it. And I really appreciate the different kinds of learning, Quan, that you mentioned. And I'm wondering if this is supposed to be autobiographical, but is it supposed to be some sort of a prototype? Can we do it faster than Confucius? Probably we could take longer. But in what sense is this a mold?
I actually heard the theme to the $6 Million Man when you asked that, but faster, better. No, I do think that it is. I think it is prescriptive, but I don't believe it is absolutely formulaic. I think one of the themes that Confucius seems really good at is saying there's no stock formula for the, how do I put this, the dynamic form that the world takes. There are just sort of best practice principles. And if you follow these, you'll get best results. I think Yanwei, being his beloved student, was the student who demonstrated for him that, oh, you can do this on an accelerated track. And that was possibly one of the reasons why Yanwei was such a star student. But I'll give it over to Jason.
I just like to share my opinion on this one by reading this text. Okay, I think it's reflective. Okay, that's during the end of Confucius' year of when he was 70. He kind of think back what he did in his long life. So nothing prescriptive, nothing descriptive. He probably just reflect what he did for the whole year.
Go ahead, Quan.
No, I thought that Jason wanted to read something.
No. I just my thought. I think it's Confucius. When I read this one in Chinese, feel like Confucius. My feeling is an old man and talk about my life, something like this. Nothing more or less.
Oh,
I get that feeling too.
I think that it is absolutely legit to interpret that in a biographical perspective. But let's not forget that when I was 70, I am capable to do what I want without overstepping the bound. At 50, I was capable to hear the will of heaven. At 60, I was capable to hear the will of heaven without complaining or with my ear attuned. Okay, without complaining is my own translation. I would say that yes, it might be biographical, but let's not forget that within Confucianism, Confucius is the absolute model for 10,000 generations, okay? So, and I know that I'm a little bit of a pain in the ass, always reminding that it's a book that has been chosen in 136 BCE for the Chinese ruling class, and it has been maintained as a book for the Chinese ruling class till the end of the empire in 1912, okay? So during 2,000 years, that book has been used for future leaders. So absolutely, I agree with you that it's probably there is an element of biographical perspective that I don't reject, but it is also a template as the epistemological development, because as Ammon said, I don't know when, but today, this book has been curated, okay, by the ruling class, okay, for specific reasons. And that biography for sure, but also a template for epistemological development. I stop here. I would like to read something very short, okay, but that I consider as a very short equivalent of the 2.4. It's 15.1. The Junzi seeks it in himself, and the small man seeks it in others. Okay, so for me, the Junzi seeks it in himself, and the small man seeks it in others, is precisely the radical invitation to that journey to the different levels of learning, or to say things in a little bit more pedantic manner, to the epistemological journey. I stop here.
Let's see. Sorry about that. Having technical difficulties. There we go. Sorry. Michael, go ahead.
So I'm wondering how this relates to, like, say, the development of benevolence over one's life. You know, those types of things. Is that, you know, the different aspects of personal ethical development. If there's, you know, some type of order in this, some type of hierarchy related to age, that type of thing, as far as what's developed.
Sorry, I'm struggling with all these windows. I am going to let somebody else take a crack at answering that, and I'm going to get Paul's thoughts first. Paul, go for it.
Yeah, I'm on the top. I'm just, it's kind of off topic, maybe. So if anyone knows, great. If they don't, but I was wondering about the average life expectancy of that era compared to age 70, because my thought would be that most people just didn't make it. I mean, the average, I think, I just a thought on comments on that might be interesting.
That I actually can comment on really quickly. The lifespan mortality rate that is so commonly understood is skewed by the numbers of infant mortalities and youth mortality. And so it creates an average that is much lower. But in general, a person who managed to live past the age of 16-ish would have about the average lifespan that we see now, minus a decade or so. So 70 was not unusual. It was not the most common, but not uncommon. Jason, go ahead.
First, let me address Paul's comment on the age. Okay. Yeah, I think Amon is right. Okay. But definitely, even today, 73, we consider it good life, right? So even today's standard. So secondly, the thing I more admire Confucius is he's energetic. he get his job at 53, got fired at 57 or something, and travel around the world, okay, so Chinese world, for 10 years, I think, and come back. So this part I really admire. Same as his father. According to legend, his father is a giant, strong man. And then he get, when he was 70, he married 18 years ago and have Confucius. So this Confucius family is quite energetic. That's the part I think we all need to learn. Okay, not marry a young girl part, but basically, it's a very energetic family, powerful. Back to, I think Michael talk about the 2.4, about is the development of benevolence. I believe you talk about Ren, okay, which is a key teaching about Confucius. At least I don't see this way. I think this 2.4 is describe his own life. Okay, I don't see he talk about benevolence, and the benevolence kind of like his trademark, or you want to talk about his the highest virtue. It's not through development through from your heart, and some people, well, there were the development concept of the Ren or benevolence will not come out until 150 years later. In Mencius's time, have more detail on how to develop this kind of virtue. I at least I don't see in the Analects Confucius talking about how to behave virtually or proper, but probably didn't talk about how to develop your virtue. That's just my opinion.
I want to take a moment to sort of bridge what Jason just said, what Quan just said, or said a moment ago, and what you were talking about, the difference between Confucianism and state Confucianism. It is absolutely the case that when the rise of the Han Dynasty, Confucianism was sort of imbued with a polemic element, which was how to maintain central control. Confucius, if you read closely, doesn't exactly seem to be a screaming endorser of centralized control and dictatorship, because he's seen it go wrong so many different ways. But that was definitely a scrubbed part of the Analects as they were passed down, because you don't want your functionaries to be, thinking about starting their own spin-off state, as was remonstration, another value that Confucius really had lifted. It was tamped way down. And so the way of sort of curating Confucianism to meet the needs of a ruling class starts with the Han and lasts, a couple of millennia. When Quan, you were talking earlier about sort of the difference between this polemic element of Confucianism and how it was originally conceived, this is part of what it was getting at. And as far as the prescriptive elements go, they come in much more with state Confucianism. But Quan, go ahead.
I would say here that we enter in one of the big discussions about Confucianism, okay? Because what persisted during the 20th centuries, where Confucianism has been a state doctrine, is as the ideal was still to create the Junzi, okay, to create the gentleman, the person having a Ran. Perfect humanity is one of my favorite translation, but it can be something else. Okay, let's say Ran. And that Ran precisely was at the center of the learning of being precisely. Okay, because when I offer the paragraph 2.4, I was thinking of different kind of learnings. Okay, learning the information, the knowledge, learning the skills, including social skills, but learning how to being. And within the imperial bureaucracy, at least in the speech, okay, at least at the level of the speech, there was still that ideal of creating the Junzi, the man having enough being to be humane, to be compassionate, and to be efficient at the same times. We were saying maybe the other day, I don't remember when exactly, that the gentleman doesn't have to be a clumsy nerd. Okay, so there that I use the interaction between the lower trigram and the upper trigram. The upper trigram was precisely insisting on that being, in that capacity to be humane, to be compassionate, but at the same time, the lower trigram, that gentleman being humane and compassionate is also capable of technical performance. To what extent that ideal speech has been truly incarnated throughout the 20th centuries, I would say that it would be many theses of PhD for that. But what is for sure is that during the different dynasty, you have exemplars of that ideal Junzi. Could be certain prime minister, could be certain chancellors, could be certain minister, could be even a low-ranking official, or even commoners who embody the high quality of a run. So I think that it's okay for academic discussion to distinguish between the Confucianism of imperial bureaucracy and the Confucianism of personal development. But I want to stress that within that imperial bureaucracy, and I have, let's say that I have the pretension to know a little bit Chinese history, within the ideal, within the, let's say, the practicality of everyday administration within that imperial bureaucracy, and notwithstanding some defects of characters or of behavior that history has recorded, that ideal of the Junzi still permeated that class of scholar officials during the 20 centuries of empire. And I would say that if the Chinese empire lasted for 20 centuries with ups and downs, it was thanks in part to the military power of the imperial house, but also a lot thanks to that class of scholar official centered on Confucianism. And I stop here.
Quan, I just want to point out that a little bit of knowledge of Chinese history, if you knew 10% of it, that would be the equivalent of knowing all of US history. So take that for what it's worth. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, just want to comment on the two questions raised by Paul and Michael. Very interesting. So let me take the Paul's question about the age first. The key, the clue is 50. Yeah, in this passage, 50, year 50 is the key figure. My Leggy translation says something like, you know, at 50, I knew the decrees of heaven. Well, most Chinese would actually interpret as mortality, right? When you reach 50, you have very keen sense of mortality. So anything could happen after that. So that's a kind of a psychological mental benchmark for Asians. Now the question about Michael, I think this is I have a slight different take than Jason, but then you know, the hallmark of the classic is that it invites different interpretations, and some of them could be diametrically different. So I would agree with the suggestion Michael made. Actually, there is behind whatever on the surface, there is the actual idea that your sense of maturity, or completeness, or the idea of perfect, complete kind of grows with age. So it's much less the factual description that by the year of 60 I have succeeded in life, therefore I could do whatever I want at the age of 70. It's much less that sense, but rather, I may be a failure in the society, I may be poor at the age of 70, but I cultivate my inner world so well. I'm such a virtuous person that actually I regulate my sensual impulse so well that I don't feel like I have to have that material stuff. So it's something like that behind this passage. At least many of the contemporary Chinese would take it that way.
So I'm going to take my advantage again, and I'm going to share, but I'm going to do what we've done a little bit throughout the Analects. Did I just share this? Okay, good. So I want to read one passage, the Leggy version, and then our translation, just to see what 150 years can do for translation, or how much interpretation goes in translation. The Leggy version of Book 5, verse 28. The master said, "In a hamlet of 10 families, there may be found one honorable and sincere as I am, but not so fond of learning." In our translation, the master said, "In a town of 10,000 households, a very small town, there must be someone who is devoted to work and trustworthy to people like me. Sure. But there will be none who is eager to learn like me." I liked this passage both for what it says, which is basically to update. There will always be somebody as talented or more talented than you. There will always be somebody that is as privileged or more privileged than you with as many advantages. But is there somebody willing to work as hard? Because you have absolute control over that. And that was kind of Confucius' message here. In a small town, you can find somebody who's devoted to work. They are skilled, they're willing to do, and who is trustworthy, liked by people, and gets all the advantages of having the whole neighborhood like him. But you're not going to find somebody who's going to work it as hard on themselves as him, is what he's saying. I like this because it seemed to me like an iteration of what I just said. Talent and privilege, there may always be better than you, but work, that's entirely in your control. But the difference of 150 years of James Legge's first translation of the Analects versus what Jason and I had produced shows the change, not just in tone, but also in understanding. The word Hamlet appears nowhere there, but what he interpreted is, okay, this is like an English countryside hamlet. So and you can almost feel the tweed elbow patches and the smoking jacket and, the frumpy mustache and the hum, 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 as he was reading over these to put out his translation. They're of a time and place. Translation is always of a time and place. It's impossible to escape that. But I do appreciate, Jason, your dedication to being as faithful to the text as possible while still being considerate of the readers who would be the current reader. So, talent, privilege, and hard work. Anybody have any thoughts there? Okay. Anybody have another passage they want to share?
Well, I would just,
go ahead.
because Joseph's not here, I have a feeling that he would bring up the Stoics at this point and say that what is within your power and within your control is what you can really work with, and not to worry so much about what is not within your power.
I think I would agree with that. I also think there's something about the just dogged determination. You know, I may not be as talented as you. I may not be as hard, as good at this job as you, but I can sure try and learn it a lot more, put in more time learning it than you'll put in learning it, or this task, or this vocation. Go ahead, Juan.
Well, I was not inspired by that paragraph at first, but after what you said, I am extraordinarily inspired by that paragraph. So, because very strangely, it can be I can make a rapprochement with 2.4 and with 15.21. Okay, the gentleman seeks it within himself, and the small man seeks it with others. In the sense that I said, I think 2 weeks ago, that 15.21 was the radical invitation to personal sovereignty. And the paragraph you just read, even if it did not appear to me at once like that, but it's definitely an invitation to personal sovereignty, what is within your reach and what is within your control. After all, I stop here.
I think the love of learning thing, I have to confess a shortcoming. I didn't wind up going to college until I was the old man in college, because I loved learning and I thought it was enough to just learn. And then my bank account said, no, you actually need credentials to go with that learning. But I do think that Confucius envisioned these two things running in parallel, that the actual love of learning and the learning itself would sort of spontaneously produce the credential of your qualification. We don't live in that world now, and I don't think that world has ever been one that was lived in, but I think it's one he envisioned. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, just briefly comment on this passage. He makes he separates two concepts. One is being honorable, being trustworthy, being faithful, and the second is being knowledgeable. Right? So it's like this old, Aristotelian idea in his ethics that actually you don't need to learn a lot of book stuff, right, in order to have virtue. Some of the virtues are cultivated or habituated, but you don't need to learn a lot of book stuff. So there is a separation there. So Confucius clearly, acknowledged that. But then he went on to express a sense of pride or maybe even arrogance that in terms of learning, there's very few people out there can beat me. So in a sense, he expressed this sort of the attitude that sort of arrogance that learning somehow is only limited to a few selected individuals.
I would say I'm struck how non-Confucian in terms of being humble this Confucius tends to be sometimes. But yeah, I think love of learning is something that is easy to accredit yourself great quantities of without necessarily having any metric to measure it by, other than people watch and say, well, yeah, he obviously does love learning. You can't really know you love it more than the other person, but you can know that you're doing it more by observation. We're about 20 minutes out from the end. I want to definitely make sure if you have a passage that you've been sitting on that you wanted to discuss, this is a great time to put up that exclamation point or shout into the wilderness that, yeah, this one.
Mark has one, right?
Oh, good.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was thinking about last week when we read right near the end, book 15, chapter 33. I had a question about it that we weren't able to get to. So when you mentioned saving something for today, I made a note about this. And I remember Jason's translation a little bit of 1533. And I don't think it really resolved my questions about it. I looked at Leggy and Lau, and I don't know if you want me to read this beforehand.
Oh, yes, I'm looking at it now.
Or you.
I can read it. You've got it up, and I
I'll
feel
tell
like
you
anytime I see Jason's translation, I have to read.
I'll tell you what my question is,
Sure.
and then look at it. It's basically, what is the referent? What is the it that is being referred to that is not understanding, not Ren, not benevolence, something else? Is there something that we are supposed to be thinking about inferring?
I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to see what anyone else has to say before I share my version.
Okay, before everyone said that, let me put this one. Okay, well, I think we put the it on purpose. Okay, because Chinese word 知, okay, keep using 知. Okay, 知 means it, that. Okay, so I don't know what Confucius meant. Okay, so use your own imagination. That's my point. Just like Aman keep reminding, that's keep ambiguity there because that's the text here. Okay, so I just translate as it, and I'm glad Mark mentioned this one, and then it will be everyone, have your own opinion. Go ahead.
Well, I can't see if hands are up, but
Yeah.
actually I can see. I would suggest just look one verse back, because this is an instance where I think clustering really makes a difference. The previous verse, the master said, a junsa pursues the Tao, not food. If he farms, he may still be hungry. If he learns, he may be hired. A junsa worries about the Tao, not about poverty. Well, what is the it? It is the Tao. It is the way that harmonious societies can be done. And so if we think of the Tao as not the Tao Te Ching ephemeral Tao, but the Tao as he uses it, the way it should be, then the master said, if you have the wisdom to reach the Tao, but cannot, oh, I lost it there. I have to actually pull it back up. It's okay, I've got it here. I just have to actually pull it back up. But substitute the it with the word Tao, and I think you have an idea of what he is expressing to people that can be maintained. There we go. If you have the wisdom to reach it, but cannot maintain it with Ren, even though you possess it, eventually you will lose it. Extrapolate from there, and I think it makes perfect sense, but I'll give it over to Quan.
Well, Aman, I have to say that you gave my favorite interpretation for that paragraph, in the sense that I think too that it's the Tao. However, it can be something more down to earth. Okay, I would say that the Tao would be my first answer for it, but my second answer for that would be a principality or an official position, in the sense that if you replace it by an appanage, an aristocratic appanage or a principality, the paragraph can be understood if you replace it by an official position, for example, chancellor or prime ministership, the paragraph will still be understood. But what is definite is that the word Tao is perfect because Tao can be understood at the high epistemological development, the epistemological journey or the result of it, or material possession or official position, which needs those different qualities to be maintained. I stop here.
Nick, go ahead.
Yeah. So I have a different interpretation, which is on the other end of the spectrum from Dao. He's actually talking to the head of state. He's advising a government how to govern. Because there's a couple of words in the Leggy translation, govern, and the people in Chinese here really means the citizen, the governed, rather than your fellow neighbors. So in that sense, this passage could be perfectly read as advice to the head of state. But yeah, maybe by extension, it could also apply to Dao. So the it immediate for me means government. So he's talking about politics.
Okay. Jason?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Yeah, I agree with Nick on politics, but I disagree with something. Okay, again, it's totally based on the text. Okay, so because he used the word mean, okay, means common people. So this one deal with common people, whether or not the common people respect you or not. So the audience must be doing political, doing government job. But I reject, I disagree on talking to the head of state because we read carefully when Confucius talking to the head of state will not say 子曰, Confucius say no. He will say Confucius reply. Okay, so in front of head of state, it's never called the master, always called Confucius. So that's the way I say it's not head of state, but must be the government official or his disciple, the potential government official.
Yes.
Go ahead, Quan.
Well, I think that we gave all the possibility, okay, from the highest result of the epistemological journey to the possession of an aristocratic appanage or a principality in one word, or to an official position. But what is clear, what is the central notion here, that Confucius was speaking definitely to someone that will receive some political responsibility. Okay, and even in your first interpretation, Aman, when you were speaking of the Tao, the Tao, when the word Tao is pronounced by Confucius, it has a political implication necessarily.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I can absolutely see this passage being read to a test master for the imperial exams when they're first inheriting that job, as to here, this is what you need to consider when you're going to be. So it is going to be transmitted to somebody for whom their learning, their education, they're going to be in a position of authority. And this was Confucius' highest hopes for his students and his students going down the line, is that they would have their hands in the instruments of government. This was to remind whoever that person was inheriting that station that they had a lot of responsibilities that came with that, and a lot more learning to do, a lot more work to do to maintain it and obtain it, or maintain it and elevate it to a station worthy of the name of their teacher. I have one more passage I would love to get to. We have just enough time. I'm gonna share because it touches me in a very particular way, and that is 6:3. So I will share my screen real quick. Can everyone? There we go. Duke Ai of Lu asked, which of the disciples are eager to learn? Confucius replied, there was Yanwei. He was eager to learn. He never shifted his anger and he never repeated his errors. Unfortunately, his life was short. He died already. Now there are none. I have not heard of anyone who is eager to learn. This breaks my heart. Not nearly as much as it broke Confucius, obviously. There's many passages about his beloved Yanwei, his golden student. But I remember my first student I found out had died. It was many years ago that Anne died of breast cancer. I knew that she had it. She had been fighting it when she was a student of mine in class. I remember her attending class after chemo the first time and seeing that wane, sallow, just the effects of that. And then she recovered. She seemed to be doing good. And a couple of years later, I heard, oh yeah, she passed away. And it was the first time it really hit me that I wouldn't outlive every student I had, which is a violation of some degree of natural order. In the same way that parents are expected to outlive their children, grandparents are certainly expected to outlive grandchildren. There is something of the relationship between teacher to student, that same expectation. You're passing on information because you're implicitly believing that information will be carried into the future by somebody long after you're gone. And so the first time a teacher experiences a student's death, it gets them in a very particular way. I remember learning about funerals when I took my ordainment and what to expect. And the person who was kind of coaching me how to go through it said, you need to remember, a person who loses their parents has lost their past, but that is expected. A person who loses their partner has lost their present. That is unexpected. A person who loses a child loses their future, and that is crushing. Losing a student is losing part of that future, and that is part of the reason it is so crushing. I pick this verse because to me, I can feel Confucius' sorrow through the centuries, through the text. Granted, it's about his, and to make it worse, Anne was not my golden student. She was not the person I had pinned all my hopes on, but Yanwei was for Confucius. And so the amount of grief that just transmits for me in that passage, I find very touching. Love to hear your thoughts, though. Mark, go ahead.
I'm not sure. That was very touching. Thank you for sharing that. I wonder if we know at what stage he was according to 2:4, and how this may have contributed to logical development.
As I said earlier, I think Yanwei may have been the evidence of there was a fast track to Confucius 2-4 stages. Probably why he was such a golden boy. But But what stage he was, I could not say. Quan?
Uh, I would say that that's my own belief. Okay, I would say that Yan Hui was certainly in the timeless reality. Yan Hui died when he was 40 years old. Okay, so theoretically, if we follow the pattern, he would at 40 years old. I'm no more confused, but it's symbolic. Okay, you can be chronologically at 40 years old, but you can be epistemologically at 50 or 60 years old. So according to my understanding, I would put Yan Hui at least at 50 years old symbolically, meaning I heard the will of heaven, or even at 60 years old, I heard the will of heaven without complaining. Because, and I want to remind a little bit what Jason said many weeks ago, or many months ago. Let's not forget that it was a school of philosophy and of epistemology and of personal growth, of course, but it was also a kind of political party. So Confucius was probably hoping that Yan Hui would be the shining leader of his political party that would bring the needed reform within the Lu Principality when he would die. Okay, so Amon, you are absolutely right to say that Yan Hui death has been crushing for Confucius because he saw him as a spiritual son, but he also saw him as his successor in his political endeavor. And for Confucius, as for all philosophers of ancient times, East or West, philosophy was not only for talking or discussing. Philosophy has to be translated in political life. If not, it was not true philosophy.
Thank you, Quan. And I agree. I do think it's allegorical, though. And as much as it was concretely that in history, it is also the allegory of every teacher to every student. I pin the hopes of the future upon you by sharing this space and this time with you. I've always said, my job is simple. I'm lazy. I'm passing the buck. And all the people I'm passing the buck to, or a good portion of them, are here with me tonight. That's the teacher's essential job. That's the professor or instructor's essential job, is just to pass the buck. And that takes a tacit belief that there's a snowball's chance in hell that there will be a better tomorrow for them to enact this in. That, nobody's going to be hitting the nuke button tomorrow night. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, thank you both for those interpretations. I was really asking about what age or what decade Confucius was in when his people died. But it's also interesting to ask where Yan Hui was as well. But I was thinking that it corresponds with the age of 60 when his ear was obedient to follow the mandate of heaven. When you realize that some things are going to be beyond your control and you have to not necessarily conform, but accept what the greater cosmos is doing. And Nick put in the chat that he was maybe 61 when Yan Hui died, so that would line up.
Forgive me for my interruption. Yan Hui died in 481 BCE, and Confucius would die 2 years later in 479 BCE when he was 72. So in 481 BCE, Confucius was 70.
Which is interesting, because that's a point where he could follow his heart without being out of sync with the mandate of heaven or what was right, even though his students gave him some flack about over grief, about being over demonstrative of his loss. And so I do find that to be going back to what I said before, never the absolute textbook prescription of in all instances, in all circumstances, but ever sensitive to what does the time and place actually call for.
Yeah. Aman, I don't know if you
Sorry.
remember. I don't know.
Nick
sorry,
just said, there goes the internet search credibility. Go ahead, Quan.
I don't know if you remember. I think that you know the anecdote, okay? In Zen Buddhism, there was the story of a master of Zen who was killed by a thief. And when he was killed, he shouted very loudly. And some of his disciples were a little bit disappointed. How come that our master, who should be at the apex of meditation, shouted when he was killed by a thief? But I would say here, we can make a rapprochement because Confucius probably was a very advanced person epistemologically, and I have a witness to think that he was at the apex. But it's not because you're at the apex of your epistemological development that you are no more human, okay? In the sense that symbolically being at 70 years old doesn't mean that you are a robot without feelings. And when you feel, when you lose something very close to you, or someone very close to your heart, or something very close to your heart, well, it's perfectly normal, even for a sage, to express his pain.
Yeah, there's a wonderful parable. Speaking of Zen Buddhism, two monks walking, mud puddle, a lady trying to cross. One of them picks her up, throws them on her shoulders, runs across. They walk on in silence. The other staring at him. It's like, what? Well, why did you put that lady on your shoulders? Because it's a violation of the song. And he said, I put that lady down half a mile ago. You're the one still carrying her. I love that story.
Absolutely.
It is 7 o'clock. It is game time, or the end of game time. Everyone, thank you. I thank you, all my students. I'm very happy to have seen your faces and see you not sleeping in class. That's a great job. I have your names. I will be adding this to your grade books for the extra credit. You are free to go. For everyone else, thank you guys for joining us on this. I will be the first to admit the Analects has not been the most inspirational or fun to translate, but I have learned a lot from it. And I have learned a great deal of appreciation for Confucius in a number of ways, including some that like I said, I connect with very viscerally, because this is a teacher. These are his students. These are his class notes. And his lessons were so profound that more human beings would be affected by them than any other teacher in history. That's a hell of a claim to be able to hang on your hat. So even if he didn't consider himself a success for never having had a job, we're still talking about him, 2.5 millennia later. So I'm calling him, I'm giving him the win on this. It certainly may not have seemed like he was winning at the time, but in the grand schemes of Eastern thought traditions, he won.
He won.
Okay.
And also, I just wanted to ask if any of the students, wanted to jump in with any. We were taking up a lot of the airspace.
I think Daniel was the only one brave enough to actually speak in front of a room of strangers, which I may give you an extra credit point for, because I'm desperate to get speak up. Your thoughts count too, damn it. Yes, you. I won't call you out by name because I'm being recorded, but you know who you are.
Well, I could share something else. It's not as much of the discussion, but it's a joke that I thought of. Well, not a joke I remembered. So you mentioned that life is like toilet paper.
Yes.
I mean, I'd say it's school appropriate, but you mentioned that life is like toilet paper. The further it goes on, the faster it goes. And that reminded me of another joke. Life is like toilet paper. Either you're on a roll or you're taking craps from some butthole.
I will give that not but Quan as in Zen Quan cred. All right, guys. I will see you all hopefully in 2024 when we get back to the Tao Te Ching. I'm excited for that. That's fun. Apparently Jason has decided we're going to translate it again because once was just the practice run. Now we're going to do it for real.
Yeah, we use Confucius Analects to practice our skill, and the goal is to, because the Confucius Analects is more difficult. So we use the one to sharpen our tool. Let's remember Confucius said, if you want to complete something, you have to sharpen your tools first. So we just sharpen our tools, then we are ready to go to the Tao Te Ching for 2024.
Are you saying you're taking your translation into the upper trigram?
Right now it's in lower trigram, and the next year will be the upper trigram. Sorry, you probably wait for another year. We will get upper trigram for Confucius.
Yeah,
So
We keep
I've got it.
cycling going up. So
exactly.
his-
Jason, thank you for that. Okay, because I said to you that Taoism is the apex of the Confucianist journey. So
okay, we will see next year.
So I'm going to take one of my students into the breakout room because they made a request. I will see you all in 2024, guys. Thank you. Have great holidays. All right. I'll see you
Okay,
there in a moment.
Among I'm going to leave. I let you take care of all the things.
Okay.
All right. See you guys.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.